A couple months ago, OC University did this research study to test if the amount of break days that you had between practice sessions or days had any effect on your improvement in tapping stamina. And in case you're not familiar with OC University, it is this improvement-focused OSU Hub and OSU Coaching Hub, basically this place for people to share their wisdom and experience and knowledge of the game with everyone else, and just sort of be a platform to share your game knowledge with the public. So the data for the study has been analyzed, and I am just going to be walking through the results here and sort of giving my own commentary on it as well. So first, a bit of background and introduction as to the study itself and how exactly it worked. So the big question was really trying to figure out how long of a break you should take between sessions in order to really optimize tapping stamina improvement. So obviously, I think everyone hopefully knows that taking rest between practice is really, really important for pretty much gaining any skill. But the world of OSU pretty much has no actual research data supporting like pretty much any of the claims that people have about improvement. So I was like, let's start fixing that. So I thought of this study and I was like, let's just put it together and see what results come out of it. So a quick sort of definition of tapping stamina, you can split it into your tapping technique and also just raw physical endurance. And a lot of people say that technique is more important than physical, endurance or stamina, but they're both definitely necessary. Also important to note that stamina in OSU is not really physical stamina in the same way you might think with like other types of muscle development or strength training, but the actual principles for how to train them, such as stuff like progressive overload and obviously resting, still definitely apply. So for the context of this study, we had practice days, which were days where the players actually practiced tapping stamina, right? And break days where the player completely did not touch the game at all. Okay, so the study split everyone into groups of 7. There were pretty much 1,000 participants. So group 1 played pretty much every day and only had 1 day off per week. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you had group 7 who only practiced 1 day per week. And group 4 played every other day, and then the other groups were somewhat in between there. The study was 29 days long, so pretty much 4 weeks from February 1st to March 1st of 2022. So also we tried to balance the groups by the current skill level or stamina level that the players already had. So we asked people when they signed up to rate their current stamina ability, and we tried to basically balance all the groups so that they were around the same starting point. All right, so what we told everyone to do was actually really simple. We just told them to, for practice days, just train your tapping stamina to mild exhaustion by the end of your session. Definitely stop if you feel pain, all that sort of stuff. There was this document of guidelines that we had people follow and sort of refer back to throughout the study. So if you're really interested in all the sort of guidelines that we gave everyone, then that is also linked later on in this document right here. So instead of being super, super strict on the practice sessions, we instead just had people practice pretty much however they wanted, and then we had them submit all of this data on what exactly they did during their session. So the way that we tracked everyone's progress was we had them play these long stream practice maps just to sort of give us a diagnostic score of where their stamina abilities were. So we had them playing long stream practice just for diagnostics, but we really, really tried to emphasize, and it is written here in the guidelines as well, the long stream practice maps are really just for training tapping technique, and they can also benchmark your stamina, but they're not really designed to actually train stamina. The reason why those maps might help you is because they are refining your technique, and obviously technique is really important when it comes to stamina, but the actual raw endurance part of stamina improvement comes from actual maps that have, patterns basically. So yeah, I won't go too in depth on that, but that is basically the idea. So we just had people play these maps to submit a diagnostic score so that we could keep track of everyone's progress. And so we had them submit 2 different diagnostic scores. One was the highest accuracy run that they got on any BPM of these maps, and the other was the highest BPM run where they got at least 70% accuracy. All right, so the results, a couple precautions about looking into this data. So obviously a lot of people ended up dropping out. So what we did is we weighted the data based on how much of the study that person actually completed. And then also we tried to remove outliers as much as possible. And this was because it made such such a big impact, especially when the best players or the worst players in the group dropped out. And the best example of this is that KHZ, for example, actually participated in the study. He was in group 3, but he dropped out towards the end. And when we looked at the data, it looked like group 3 got a lot worse at the end. But then I realized that KHC was there and he dropped out at the end, and I was like, okay, we need to remove the outliers. So yeah, that is why that is a thing. Okay, so in order to compare everyone's scores with one another, we made this formula that sort of standardizes everyone's scores. And so using this formula, we were able to compare everyone's score 1 with each other. So let's look at how each group did. So what we see is that most groups pretty much stayed the same, or like they kind of went up and then back down again. But like just comparing the starting point and the ending point, pretty much every group was around the same. Also, I am really not sure what happened to group 7. I think like in the 3rd week, they just decided to get really bad for some reason. And then they came back up. Just based on this data, it would seem like the only group that really improved was group 4, which is this sort of like teal bluish color. Seem to gradually increase throughout the study. Okay, so let's also look at the percent increases between each group to sort of get a better idea here. Okay, group 7 again is a little strange. So just for the sake of comparing the groups to one another, let's get them out of the equation. And we end up with this graph where, by the way, this is 5% since 0.05, right? So any data points above this middle line means that they improved that week. And then a negative number would mean that their average performance got worse. And the only group that was consistently above this line, again, was group 4. And most other groups kind of either went up or down. Like you had group 5, for example, that had a 6% increase after the first week, but then at the last week, they had a 5% decrease in performance. So this was just the score 1 that everyone submitted, which was the highest accuracy run. But now let's compare everyone's score 2s with each other. And for comparing these scores, we just looked at the BPM values rather than making a formula to try standardizing everything. And what we end up with is, once again, group 7 being very strange, but for the most part, pretty much everyone stayed the same. And our fan favorite from before, group 4, actually got gradually worse when it comes to BPM. And the only group that really improved their average maximum BPM was group 2, which went from a solid 163 to 165. So really not that much of a difference. So just for some extra context, let's compare that data to how long everyone's sessions were. So you would think that the groups that had the most days of practice would also have the shortest sessions, obviously, because they don't want to play as much on any given day. But group 1, which actually had the most practice days, actually averaged the longest sessions as well, except for group 7, who ended up overtaking them by the end. But aside from group 1, pretty much everyone was as you would expect, where the more practice days you had, the shorter your sessions were. So down here you can see group 2, 3, 4, 5, which is this green one, and then 6 and 7. And everyone averaged around 2 to 3 hour sessions total. So looking at all this data, so far it kind of seems like no one actually improved, but there's another data metric that we can look at, which is their perceived rate of improvement. So something else that we asked players after each practice session is, how much do you feel like you improved compared to the session before? So we asked them on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 means they got worse and 7 means they got better. And then 4 would mean that they just feel the same as they were the previous session. And what we find is that for every group on any given week, they averaged very slightly above neutral, so around 4.1 to 4.5. And this sort of shows that even though the objective scores kind of fluctuated a lot, everyone pretty much, like on average, felt that they were very slightly improving. So one reason for this could be what's called the subject expectancy effect, which pretty much means that, like, since people were in this study sort of like expecting to be improving since they were practicing tapping stamina, that they actually felt like they were improving as well. But honestly, to be honest, like, this is something that I've experienced, and I think a lot of people as well, where as I play the game more, like, even though I might feel generally more comfortable at the game, like, I might not always be beating my old scores. So I think it's just a sort of very natural, like, you know, as you're practicing, you usually feel like you're getting better. So yeah, that is that. Okay, so at this point, I think it's fair to say that the amount of break days that the participants had didn't really make a big difference on improvement. And to be honest, it kind of seems like people didn't really improve much at all, although everyone did feel like they were slightly improving. But before we wrap up, let's look at a different metric that is also really, really important to improving any skill, and that is sleep. So as you may know or should know, sleeping is one of the most or probably the most important thing that you can do when it comes to improving, and especially after you've practiced, being able to really set in that improvement. And it sort of goes hand in hand with rest or break days, but sleep is definitely one of those really key metrics. Okay, so for this part of the data analysis, we completely did away with the old groups where we grouped people by their break days, and we regrouped everyone based on how much sleep they reported getting throughout the entire month. So pretty much groups 1, 2, and 3 were under 7 hours of sleep, groups 4 and 5 were between 7 and 8, and then groups 6 and 7 were over 8 hours of sleep. And you can see the screen for the more specific breakdown. Okay, now using these new groups, let's compare everyone's score 1 performance. So groups 2 and 3 actually had the highest scores throughout the month. And when we group everyone this way, most groups actually seem to improve. So groups 2, 3, 4, and 5 all seemed to gradually improve. Group 6 actually went down throughout the study. And group 1 was kind of all over the place, but they definitely at least ended in a much higher spot than they started. And then group 7 here kind of went up and then back down again. So whether or not this data is actually significant is not really clear. I don't think any conclusions can really be drawn from this data, but rather I think it's a good starting point if anyone wants to look more into this in their own research studies that they might do. And also I would really like to emphasize, and I put this here in the document as well, you should not try forcing yourself into one of these sleep groups that quote unquote perform the best on this chart, especially if it does not match your lifestyle. Please don't just be like, oh, groups 2 and 3 were getting the best scores, so, I'm just going to force myself to sleep like 6.5 hours and I'll be just fine, right? Like, definitely do not do that. There are lots of negative health benefits that come from, first of all, cutting your sleeps short and also sleeping under 7 hours regularly. And that's kind of outside the scope of this video, but I definitely think it's worth mentioning regardless. Okay, so in conclusion, what did we learn? Well, I think the data was actually kind of inconclusive. Like, I don't think you can really say that the number of break days makes no difference at all, but it definitely is not a very primary factor to the amount that people improve. Now, it does seem like everyone felt like they were improving at least a little bit throughout the month. And so, shocking truth, it seems like just practicing the game actually leads to slight feelings of improvement. Wow, crazy, I know. But anyway, I wouldn't necessarily say that the amount of break days has no effect, but I do think it's worth maybe looking into a little bit more if someone else wants to run a similar kind of study or test that variable in a different way, just to sort of get another view on things. And also, this should be very obvious, but there are many, many, many variables that go into improvement and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully this study can sort of be a reference point or starting point for other people to sort of do their own studies on different variables of improvement as well. So also there were a lot of other variables or data points that we collected during the study that weren't really analyzed here, just because they didn't really seem like they were influencing the main takeaway from the study, which was the amount of break days and the influence that that had. But if you guys would like to analyze any of the data yourself, there is an anonymized version of the results that you can find pinned in the Tapping Stamina Study channel in the Discord server for OC University. That text channel you can find at the very, very bottom of the server in the archive category. But yeah, also if anyone's interested in sort of using OC University as a platform where you can host your own research study or anything like that, you are definitely more than welcome to. Please just send me a message on Discord and we can sort of work things out from there. But yeah, hopefully you guys found this interesting, and thanks to anyone who followed along with this study. I would encourage you all to sort of raise discussion on the results of the study, either in the comments or in our Discord server at OC University. But yeah, with that, I will see you all next time.